Donald and Douglas are twins and had arrived from Scotland to help Sir Topham Hatt, but only one engine had been expected. The twins meant well, but did cause confusion. Sir Topham Hatt had given them numbers, Donald 9 and Douglas 10, but he was still planning to send one engine home. There was a brake van in the yard that had taken a dislike to Douglas. Things always went wrong when he had to take it out. His trains were late, and he was blamed. Douglas began to worry. Donald, his twin, was angry. "You're a muckle nuisance," said Donald. "It's to leave you behind I be wanting." "You can't," said the brake van. "I'm essential." "Ah, are you?" Donald burst out. "You're nothing but a screeching and a noise when all's said and done. Spite doggy, would you? Take that!" "Oh! Oh!" cried the van. "There's more coming should you misbehave." The van behaved better after that. Until one day, Donald had an accident. The rails were slippery. He couldn't stop in time. Donald wasn't hurt, but Sir Topham Hatt was most annoyed. "I am disappointed, Donald. I didn't expect such clumsiness from you. I had decided to send Douglas back and keep you." "I'm sorry, sir," said Donald. "I should think so, too. You have upset my arrangements. Now, James will have to help with the goods work while you have your tender mended. James won't like that." Sir Topham Hatt was right. James grumbled dreadfully about extra work. "Anyone would think," said Douglas, "that Donald had had his accident on purpose. I hear tell about an engine and some tar wagons." "Shut up," said James. "It's not funny." He didn't like to be reminded of his own accident. "Well, well, well. Surely, James, it wasn't you. You didn't say." James didn't say. He slouched sulkily away. "James is cross," snickered the spiteful brake van. "We'll try to make him crosser still." "Hold back," giggled the freight cars to each other. James did his best, but he was exhausted when they reached Edward's station. Luckily, Douglas was there. "Help me up the hill, please," panted James. "These freight cars are playing tricks." "We'll show them," said Douglas. Slowly but surely, the snorting engines forced the freight cars up the hill. But James was losing steam. "I can't do it! I can't do it!" "Leave it to me!" shouted Douglas. The conductor was anxious. "Go steady! The van's breaking!" The van was in pieces. No one had been hurt, and soon Edward came to clear the mess. Sir Topham Hatt was on board. "I might have known it would be Douglas," he said. "Douglas was grand, sir," said Edward. "James had no steam left, but Douglas worked hard enough for 3. I heard him from my yard." "2 would have been enough," said Sir Topham Hatt. "I want to be fair, Douglas, but I don't know. I really don't know." Sir Topham Hatt was making up his mind about which engine to send away, but that's another story.
The Fat Controller's engines love being shiny and clean. It makes them feel cheerful as they puff across the island of Sodor. Percy often has the dirtiest work to do, but he likes to be clean as well as any other engine. So washdowns are important to Percy. But the Fat Controller had bad news. Due to a water shortage, he said, no engine shall have more than one washdown a day. Usefulness before cleanliness, he added, and left. Percy was upset. I get dirty, he complained. I need washdowns. Gordon only does it to feel important. I am important, Gordon sniffed. I'm an express engine. You're a pouty puffer, Percy, teased James. No, I'm not, wheezed Percy, and he chuffed away. Percy was loading trucks at the docks. He was trying extra hard to stay clean, but the troublesome trucks were being naughty. As Percy pushed them under the coal chute, they sang out. On, they cried. Percy found himself under the chute, and coal dust flew everywhere. Oh, no, coughed Percy. I'm filthy. Percy felt awful, but he knew he had to carry on. On the way to Callan Station, the troublesome trucks teased Percy even more. Clickety-clack! Don't look back! Dirty Percy's on our track! Be quiet! Percy snapped. When Percy arrived at Callan Station, he was very upset. From now on, I'm only doing work where I won't get dirty, he said. Harold the helicopter was at Callan Station picking up medical supplies. Hello, Percy, he called. And he took off, blowing cinders and ashes everywhere. Not again, Percy cried. I want a washdown. Usefulness before cleanliness, reminded his driver. I want to be useful where I can't get dirty, Percy huffed. There's a load of sugar going to the chocolate factory, his driver said. We could take the sugar trucks. Sugar, said Percy. That's nice and clean. Percy was pleased. Percy didn't know that earlier a leaky truck had spilled oil on the track. When he approached the chocolate factory, his driver applied the brakes, but Percy's wheels just skidded on the oily rails. Oh no! hooted Percy. Yuck! He groaned. I've never been this dirty. He was covered from funnel to firebox in sticky, gooey chocolate. Back at the sheds, everyone thought it was very funny. You look good enough to eat, Thomas hooted. Pudding, Percy, teased James. Chalk ice on wheels, chipped in Henry. Disgraceful, said Gordon pompously. Ahem, said a stern-sounding voice. It was the Fat Controller. You have had a trying day, Percy, he said. Yes, sir, replied Percy from beneath the chocolates. But you've shown us all that usefulness does come before cleanliness. So, he added, you shall have your washdown. Oh, sir. And a new coat of paint. Percy just beamed. It's summer holiday time on the island of Sodor. Holidaymakers come from far and wide to enjoy the beauty of the island. It's the busiest time of the year for the Fat Controller's engines. Thomas was excited. The Fat Controller had sent him to pick up a special to deliver to Dryor Airfield. "What have you got there?" tooted Percy. "A balloon," replied Thomas. "A party balloon?" asked Percy excitedly. "No," said Thomas. "This is a very special balloon," and he chuffed away. Soon, Thomas arrived at the airfield. And hot air was puffed into the balloon. "What is that?" huffed James. "A hot air balloon," said Thomas. "It will take holidaymakers on rides around the island." "Taking holidaymakers on rides around the island is our job," wheezed James jealously. Then, as if by magic, the hot air balloon rose silently up into the sky. "What if the hot air balloon takes our passengers away?" chuffed James. "What will happen to us then?" This made Thomas worry. Suddenly, he wasn't so excited about the balloon. The balloon could be seen by everyone on the island of Sodor. Duck gazed at it for so long, he ran into the back of Stepney. "Why, 'tis a floating basket with folk in it," said Donald. "Whatever will they dream up next?" said Douglas. James and Thomas were waiting at the level crossing. They were still worried about the hot air balloon. "If it takes our passengers away," chuffed Thomas, "there'll be no use for us engines." "Passengers should travel on trains," huffed James, "not in silly balloons." Then something big and round and red drifted straight towards them. "We're out of hot air!" shouted a voice. "Ah!" cried James. "What's happening?" Crash! Bang! Wallop went the balloon and landed right on top of James. He was so scared he let out a huge burst of steam, which blew the balloon up again. The balloon rose into the air once more. "Well done, James," called his driver. "Your hot air did the trick." "Oh, no, James," cried Thomas. "You saved the hot air balloon." "I didn't mean to," groaned James. "Now it's sure to take our passengers." Wherever James went, he could see the balloon carrying holidaymakers across the island. He felt he should be taking those passengers. Rails are better than hot air any day. James arrived back at the station. There were lots of people on the platform. The Fat Controller was waiting too. "Well done, James," he said. "But now the passengers will ride in the hot air balloon." The Fat Controller laughed. "You're right, James," he said. "But they will need a ride home. In a train." James was delighted. The Fat Controller was right. The engines were busier than ever, taking holidaymakers to and from the airfield. Whenever James sees the red balloon, he whistles and toots. And sometimes, when he's asleep at night, James dreams he can fly too, just like the red balloon.
Thomas and Percy enjoy working in the docks. They like the sea air and the sound of the gulls. But one day the friends were feeling hot and bothered. A crane was causing trouble. His name is Cranky, and this was his first day at the docks. "You're useless little bugs," he called from above. "If you put these trucks on the inside lines, then I wouldn't have so far to travel." "Rubbish," said Thomas. "We always arrange our trucks like this, and no crane has ever complained before." "Well, I'm complaining now." And Cranky banged his load down on the quayside. Later, the two engines met Gordon and James and told them about Cranky. "Cranes are airy-fairy things. They need a lot of attention, like me, in fact," said Gordon. "You should see the situation from Cranky's point of view," huffed James. "He's high up in the air, coping with wind, rain and baking sun. Then he looks down and sees you two little engines being annoying. No wonder he called you bugs." When Cranky heard that the big engines agreed with him, he grew bossier still. Come on, push those trucks closer to me." But Percy was too upset to concentrate and pushed the trucks too far. Poor Percy. Then, Cranky played a trick on Thomas. "Push your trucks onto the outside line. It's easier for me to load up." So Thomas did. But Cranky left the loads beside the trucks, not in them. "You must have known my arm can't reach you there," complained Cranky. This mix-up caused confusion and delay. The Fat Controller was most upset. "Thomas and Percy, this new crane has an important job to do. I have heard that you have not been helping him today. You will go to your sheds and consider how you will improve yourselves tomorrow." Now, Thomas and Percy were upset too. That evening, a big storm raged across the island. Cranky and the big engines were trapped at the docks. "We're sure to be safe in this shed," said Duck. But he was wrong. The engines had no idea that they were about to be put in great danger by an old tramp steamer. It was out of control and running aground straight into the sheds. Called the engines from inside the shed. "I can't," called Cranky pathetically. When the storm was over, the Fat Controller rushed to the scene of destruction. "Thomas and Percy will help you," he called to Cranky, "and then you can help the engines." "Oh, please, hurry," cried Cranky, "and tell them I'm sorry I was rude to them." "So it was you," murmured the Fat Controller. "I owe those engines an apology." Thomas and Percy soon came to the rescue. And it wasn't too long before Cranky was upright again and clearing the wreckage. At last, all the engines were free. "Oh, thank you," said Gordon. "What would I have done without you?" "Well, I had to be rescued before I could help you. But I never thought it would be by a couple of Cranky was about to say bugs, but he quickly corrected himself. "Small engines, thank you. I'll never be rude again. However, you two mites are in my way, so move over." "Pah," said Percy. "He's back to bugging us." "Don't move. You're still attached to Cranky." But it was too late. Cranky still looks down on the two little engines. But ever since that stormy night, he never calls them bugs or mites because he knows they may bite back. It was an exciting day on the island of Sodor. "Good morning," called Harold. Annie and Clarabelle were full of happy children. Thomas was taking them to their annual sports day. Everything was ready for the day to begin. "I hope I'm number 1 and win a medal," said a boy. "It must be splendid to win a medal," chuffed Thomas. "After all, I'm engine number 1. Thomas worked hard all day, but he kept thinking about medals. He imagined himself wearing a gold medal on a red ribbon. How smart he would look. "Hello, Thomas," whistled Percy. "I'm taking the Fat Controller to Sports Day." "You can see the egg and spoon race," chuffed Thomas. "I didn't know eggs and spoons had races." "The children race with eggs and spoons," said Bertie. "And the winner gets a medal." "I wish I could get a medal." "You'll need to win a race first," whistled Percy. "I'll race you, Thomas. The first one to the station is the winner." "You're on," whistled Thomas. "Ready, steady, go." "Better hurry, Bertie," beeped Thomas. Then Thomas had to stop to pick up some passengers. "Better hurry, Thomas," teased Bertie as he rattled over the bridge. Then Bertie had to stop at a level crossing. "Last one there, Puff-Totter," called Thomas. Thomas was nearly at the station. As he drew near the playing field, a signalman flagged him down. Now Thomas was really cross. Bertie was sure to win. Then he saw the Fat Controller. "Thomas, the Sports Day medals have been left in my office. You must fetch them at once. We can't let the children down." "Of course not, sir," replied Thomas, and he chuffed away. Meanwhile, Bertie had raced into the station. "I won!" shouted Bertie. "I won!" And he waited eagerly for Thomas. He waited and waited. But Thomas had forgotten about the race. He was thinking about the children. "I can't let them down. I can't let them down." At last, Thomas puffed back into the big station. The station master gave Thomas's driver the box of medals. Then Thomas set off again. He arrived just in time. "Well done," said the Fat Controller. "Thank you, sir," panted Thomas. The Fat Controller presented the medals to the winners. "Congratulations." "Thank you, sir." The next day, Bertie and the medal winner arrived with a surprise for Thomas. A small boy presented him with a gold medal on a red ribbon. "You were very helpful at Sports Day." "So we thought you should have a medal of your own," added the boy. "My very own medal," said Thomas. "Thank you." "3 cheers for Thomas, the number 1 engine." "But I still won the race," tooted Bertie. Thomas just peeped happily. It was a sunny day on the island of Sodor, and all the engines were working hard. Gordon was feeling very excited. Morning, Thomas. I look my best, and you know why? Why? Because a Duke and Duchess are visiting, the Fat Controller will be choosing me as their special engine. Pah! Puffed Thomas. After Gordon had been washed and polished, he rushed away to meet the visitors. But a signal diverted Gordon into a siding. He was very upset. "I'm going to be late," he muttered. A huge engine rocketed by. Steaming pistons! Who's that? Gordon soon found out. When he arrived at the shed, the huge engine was humming quietly. Who are you? This is Spencer. He's the fastest engine in the world. Huh. But secretly, Gordon was impressed. I'm the Duke and Duchess's private engine. I take them everywhere. Quiet. There will be a party for our guests at Marron Station. That's far away over Gordon's Hill. You'll need to take on plenty of water, muttered Gordon. I have plenty of water, wheezed Spencer. And he raced away. I was only trying to be useful, grunted Gordon. Spencer showed the Duke and Duchess many beautiful places. But he never stopped once to take on more water. Gordon and Thomas were collecting passengers when Spencer raced through on his way to the party. Don't forget the water! Who cares? He'll be in trouble soon, sighed Thomas. And Spencer was. He ran out of water on Gordon's Hill. Why didn't I listen? Sighed Spencer. The Fat Controller soon heard the news. I'll send Gordon. When Gordon arrived, the station master was waiting. You need to rescue Spencer. He's stuck on the hill. Hurry, Gordon, said his driver. Gordon was looking forward to seeing Spencer. Run out of water? He teased. Yes, snapped Spencer. I must have a leaky tank. Perhaps, smiled Gordon. But we'd better hurry. Everyone is waiting. Gordon switched to Spencer's line and was coupled up. Then they set off. See, said Gordon, we're right on time. Spencer was embarrassed. What do you think of Spencer now? Whispered Thomas. Too much puff and not enough steam. Well done, said the Fat Controller. You're the fastest engine on Sodor. I know that, muttered Gordon.
The engines were finding life difficult. Workmen were mending the viaduct on the main line. The arches needed strengthening. Sir Topham Hatt did not want to close the railway while the work was done, and so repairs took a long time. The engines had to take great care when crossing the viaduct, and the delay often made them late on their journey to the junction, where they knew Thomas would be ready to collect his passengers. Thomas grew crosser and crosser. "Time's time," he grumbled. "Why should I keep my passengers waiting while Henry and James dawdle about all day on viaducts?" "Don't blame me," snorted Henry. "If we hurried across the viaduct, it might collapse, and then you'd have no passengers at all. What would you do then?" "Run my train on time, for one thing," retorted Thomas. He hurried away before Henry could answer. Bertie was impatient too. He was timed to arrive just after Thomas. His passengers found that instead of going straight from the bus to their train, they were kept waiting till Thomas arrived. Soon Bertie grew cross with Thomas. "Late again," he remarked, as Thomas panted wearily in. "We may be friends, but I thought you could go fast, Thomas. It's time we had another race. I reckon I could beat you now." Thomas let off steam loudly. "Rubbish!" he hissed fiercely. "It's those main line engines. They dither about on the viaduct, and they blame Sir Topham Hatt's workmen. It's just an excuse for laziness, if you ask me." One day, James was later than ever at the junction. "I'm sorry, Thomas," he puffed. "I was held up at the station, and the viaduct made it worse." "It's lucky for you I'm a guaranteed connection," grumbled Thomas. Before James could answer, he puffed importantly away. Come along," he panted to the coaches. Annie and Clarabelle did their best, but Thomas soon found that he couldn't save much time. Suddenly, Thomas saw Bertie ahead. His radiator was steaming. "What's the matter?" asked Thomas. "You should be at the station by now. You're late." "I feel dreadful," moaned Bertie. "All upset inside, and driver says he can't make me better." "Thank goodness you're late, too. Can you take my passengers, please? They'll never get home otherwise." "Of course," agreed Thomas. He now felt sorry for Bertie and promised to get help at the next station. Thomas set off again. Already he felt much more cheerful, and Bertie's passengers, traveling in Annie and Clarabelle, all reached home safely. When Bertie was better, he came to thank Thomas. "I'm sorry I teased you about being late." "That's all right," replied Thomas. "I'm glad I could help. There are times when being late isn't such a bad thing after all." With a last cheerful greeting, the two friends went back to work.
It was summertime on the island of Sodor. Gordon pulled the passenger express. It was very busy, but Gordon loved the hustle and bustle. Henry hauled trucks in the forest. He loved the peace and quiet, but he didn't see many people. Sometimes working in the forest could be very lonely. Later, Henry pulled into Knapford Station. He was delighted to see all the passengers. But Gordon was not delighted to see Henry. "Keep your smelly phrase away from my passengers," grumbled Gordon. "But it's only logs," chuffed Henry. "Passengers and freight do not mix," huffed Gordon, and he wheeshed away. Henry watched the express leave the station. "I'd like to pull passengers," sighed Henry, "just for a change." Henry stopped at the water tank on the edge of the forest. Children were standing by one of the trees. "What are those children doing?" Henry asked Thomas. "That's the old Sodor wishing tree," said Thomas. "They must be making a wish." "A wishing tree?" gasped Henry. "How wonderful! Do you think it would make my wish come true?" asked Henry. "It might," said Thomas, and he puffed away. Henry rolled up to the wishing tree. He took a deep breath and made a wish as hard as he could. "I wish I could pull the express instead of Gordon," he said. That evening the Fat Controller came to see Henry. "Tomorrow you will pull the express," he said. "Thank you, sir," said Henry happily. His wish had come true. The next morning, Henry chuffed cheerfully into Knapford Station. When his passengers were on board, Henry blew his whistle and pulled out of the station. But Henry puffed too quickly. "Go gently," called his driver. "You can bump freight, but you can't bump passengers." "Sorry," puffed Henry. Henry puffed proudly through the countryside. "Pulling passengers is a grand job," he said. Gordon was in the repair yard. He was being fitted with a new boiler. But Gordon felt lonely. He was missing his passengers. The passengers were missing Gordon too. They were having the bounciest, bumpiest ride they had ever had. When Henry got back to the sheds, the Fat Controller was waiting for him. "There have been complaints," he said sternly. "Passengers are not like logs. You must be gentle." "Yes, sir," said Henry sadly. Being gentle was very difficult. Then Henry saw Gordon. He was looking miserable. "My wish has made Gordon go to the repair yard," gasped Henry. This made Henry feel very bad. The next day, Henry had to collect the buffet car. He tried his best to be gentle, but he shunted the buffet car so hard everything flew into the air. There were more complaints than ever. Henry didn't want to pull passengers anymore. He wanted to wish everything back to normal. But when he arrived at the forest, Henry couldn't remember which tree was the wishing tree. "Oh, no," cried Henry. "Which one could it be?" Henry didn't know. So he decided to wish on all the trees. "I wish I could pull freight again," he puffed. Then he moved to the next tree and he wished again. "I wish I could pull freight again." The Fat Controller arrived on board Thomas. "What are you doing, Henry?" asked the Fat Controller. "You are causing confusion and delay." Henry told him all about the wishing tree. "Wishing trees don't run railways," said the Fat Controller. "That's my job. Gordon just needed some repairs. He'll be back tomorrow." Henry was delighted. The next day, Gordon came back to work. He looked as good as new. The passengers were so pleased to see him, they cheered and cheered and cheered. Gordon beamed happily for the rest of the day. Henry was happy to be back in the peace and quiet of the forest. At the end of the day, he stopped near the wishing tree. And even though the Fat Controller had told him trees don't run railways, Henry wished he would never have to pull passengers ever again, just in case. Toby is a steam tram. He looks very different from the other engines. He is square and his body is made of wood. Toby isn't as strong as the other engines, but he always tries his hardest. One morning, Toby was delivering some milk trucks. He puffed across the island and up Gordon's Hill. Gordon's Hill was very steep. Toby puffed hard. It was a long climb. Just then, Gordon arrived at the bottom of the hill. But today the express was heavy, and Gordon had to wait for Edward to help. "Bother," huffed Gordon. Soon, Edward puffed to the rescue. He buffered up behind Gordon. Edward pushed and Gordon pulled. At last, the express train started to move. Toby had finally reached the top of the hill when Gordon puffed past. "Slow coach," Gordon huffed. "I'm trying my hardest," gasped Toby. "Ah," sniffed Gordon. "You're not even a proper engine." This made Toby feel very sad. That night, the Fat Controller came to see Toby. "Edward is needed at the docks," the Fat Controller said. "You are to work at Wellsworth Yard in his place." "But I'll never be able to do Edward's job," Toby cried. "He's a proper steam engine." "Nonsense," said the Fat Controller. "You are one of my engines and you must be useful." Toby was very worried. What if he wasn't useful? The next morning, Toby puffed nervously out of his shed. "I hope no one needs pushing up Gordon's Hill," puffed Toby. Toby wished he was a proper steam engine. At last, Toby arrived at Wellsworth Yard. There were lots of trucks, and they looked very heavy. "I'll never be able to shunt all those," Toby puffed. "You can do it, Toby," called Thomas. That made Toby feel much better. Then he started to shunt the trucks. He shunted coal trucks for Henry and sleigh trucks for Donald. He even shunted fruit and vegetable trucks for Douglas. Maybe I can do it, Toby chuffed. But then Gordon puffed past. He was pulling the express with lots of coaches. Toby watched as Gordon puffed towards the hill. Gordon puffed with all his might, but once again the express was too heavy. Gordon was stuck. Bother, he huffed. Gordon's driver called the yard manager, and the yard manager came to see Toby. You need to push Gordon to the top of the hill, the yard manager said. Yes, sir, groaned Toby. But Gordon looks much too heavy for me to push. Toby puffed nervously. Don't worry, Thomas called. You can do it, Toby. I'll do me best, he puffed, and he chuffed off to Gordon's hill. When Gordon heard that Toby was coming, he was very cross. Toby's only a steam tramp, Gordon huffed. He will never be able to push me up the hill. Toby buffered up behind Gordon. Then he pushed with all his might. Gordon didn't move. Is that the best you can do? Gordon snorted. They should have sent a proper engine. Toby was about to give up. But then he remembered what Thomas had said. I can do it, Toby panted. Toby pushed harder and harder. Suddenly, Gordon's wheels started to move. Toby kept pushing. His engines roared and his axles ached. Gordon moved slowly up the hill. When Percy saw Toby pushing, he blew his whistle with excitement. You can do it, Toby, go on, cried Percy. Toby huffed and puffed and chuffed, but at last he pushed Gordon right to the top of the hill. Gordon was impressed. Now his express would run on time. Toby was tired, but he was very proud. I did it, he puffed excitedly. That night, the Fat Controller came to see Toby. Today you wear a very useful engine indeed, he said. Thank you, sir, Toby chuffed. And even though Toby was a steam tram, he felt like a proper engine after all.
It was an important day in the yard. Everyone was busy and excited, making notes and taking photographs. A special visitor had arrived and was now the center of attention. Who is that? Whispered Thomas to Duck. That, said Duck proudly, is a celebrity. A what? Asked Percy. A celebrity is a very famous engine, replied Duck. Driver says we can talk to him soon. Oh, said Thomas, he's probably too famous to even notice us. Just then, Gordon arrived. Huh, said Gordon.
Who cares? A lot of fuss about nothing, if you ask me. And he steamed away. Later that night, the engines found that the visitor wasn't conceited at all. He enjoyed talking to the other engines till long after the stars came out. He left early next morning. Gordon was still complaining. "Good riddance," he grumbled, "chattering all night. Who is he anyway?" "Duck told you," replied Thomas. "He's famous." "As famous as me? Nonsense." "He's famouser than you. He went 100 miles an hour before you were even thought of." "Huh, so he says," puffed Gordon. "But I didn't like his looks. He's got no dome. Never trust domeless engines. They're not respectable. I never boast, but I'd say 100 miles an hour would be easy for me. Goodbye." Duck took some freight cars to Edward's station. "Hello," called Edward. "That famous engine came through this morning. He whistled to me. Wasn't he kind?" "He's the finest engine in the world," replied Duck. Then he told Edward what Gordon had said. "Take no notice," soothed Edward. "He's just jealous. He thinks no engine should be famous but him. Look, he's coming now." Gordon was running very fast. His wheels pounded the rails. "He did it, I'll do it. He did it, I'll do it." Gordon's train rocketed past and was gone. "He'll knock himself to bits," chuckled Duck. Gordon's driver eased him off. "Steady, Gordon. We aren't running a race." "We are then," said Gordon, but he said it to himself. Suddenly, Gordon began to feel a little strange. "The top of my boiler seems funny," he thought. "It feels as if something is loose. I'd better go slower." But it was too late. On the viaduct, they met the wind. It was a teasing wind which blew suddenly in hard puffs. Gordon thought it wanted to push him off the bridge. "No, you don't," he said firmly. But the wind had other ideas. It curled round his boiler, crept under his loose dome, and lifted it off and away into the valley below. Gordon was most uncomfortable. The cold wind was whistling through the hole where his dome should be, and he felt silly without it. At the big station, the freight cars laughed at him. Gordon tried to wheesh them away, but they crowded round no matter what he did. On the way back to the shed, he wanted his driver to stop and fetch his dome. "We'll never find it now," said the driver. "You'll have to go to the works for a new one." Gordon was very cross. "I hope the shed is empty tonight," he huffed to himself. But all the engines were there waiting. "Never trust domeless engines," said a voice from somewhere behind him. "They aren't respectable."
One morning, Henry was feeling very sorry for himself. Sometimes he could pull trains, but sometimes he felt he had no strength at all. "I suffer dreadfully, and no one cares." "Rubbish, Henry," snorted James. "You don't work hard enough." The Fat Controller spoke to him too. "You're too expensive, Henry. You had lots of new parts and new paint too, but they've done you no good. If we can't make you better, we must get another engine instead of you." This made Henry, his driver and his fireman very sad. The Fat Controller was waiting when Henry came to the platform. He had taken off his hat and coat and put on overalls. Henry managed to start, but his fireman was not satisfied. "Henry is a bad steamer," he said to the Fat Controller. "I build up his fire, but it doesn't give enough heat." Henry tried very hard, but it was no good. He didn't have enough steam and came to a stop outside Edward's station. "Oh dear," thought Henry, "I shall have to go away. Oh dear, oh dear." All he could do was to go slowly onto a siding, and Edward took charge of the train. The Fat Controller and Fireman went on discussing Henry's troubles. "What do you think is wrong, Fireman?" asked the Fat Controller. "Excuse me, sir," he answered, "but the fact is the coal is wrong. We've had a poor lot lately, and today it's worse. The other engines can manage, they have big fireboxes. Henry's is small and can't make the heat. With Welsh coal, he'd be a different engine." "It's expensive," said the Fat Controller, "but Henry must have a fair chance. James shall go and fetch some." When the Welsh coal came, Henry's driver and fireman were excited. "Now we'll show them, Henry, old fellow." They carefully made his fire, putting large lumps of coal like a wall round the outside. Then the glowing middle part was covered with smaller lumps. "You're spoiling my fire," complained Henry. "Wait and see," said the fireman. "We'll have a roaring fire, just when we want it." The fireman was right. When Henry reached the platform, the water was boiling nicely, and he had to let off steam. "How are you, Henry?" "Peep, peep," whistled Henry. "I feel fine. Have you a good fire, driver?" "Never better, sir, and plenty of steam." "No record breaking," warned the Fat Controller. "Don't push him too hard." "Henry won't need pushing, sir. I'll have to hold him back." Henry had a lovely day. He had never felt so well in his life. He wanted to go fast, but his driver wouldn't let him. "Steady, old fellow," he would say. "There's plenty of time." They arrived early at the station. Thomas puffed in. "Where have you been, lazybones?" asked Henry. "Oh, I can't wait for dawdling tank engines like you. Goodbye." "Whoosh," said Thomas to Annie and Clarabel. "Have you ever seen anything like it?" Both Annie and Clarabel agreed that they never had.